May 24th, 1940. German Panzer tanks sit idling along the French countryside, their crews exhausted but victorious. Just 9 miles ahead lies Dunkirk, the last port where over 300,000 British and Allied soldiers are trapped with their backs to the sea. The Panzers have already driven over 200 miles in 2 weeks, smashing through French defenses that were supposed to be impenetrable. They've cut off the entire British expeditionary force from escape. Victory isn't just close, it's basically guaranteed. And then the radio crackles. The order comes down from the top. Stop. Do not advance. The tank commanders can't believe what they're hearing. Some of them can literally see Dunkirk from their positions. But the order is clear. Halt everything. Let someone else finish the job. This decision would haunt Nazi Germany for the rest of the war. Because those 300,000 trapped soldiers, they're about to pull off one of the most miraculous escapes in military history. So what happened? Why would Hitler stop his tanks when total victory was just 9 miles away? The answer is way more complicated than you've been told. To understand how spectacularly Germany messed this up, you need to see how fast France fell in the first place. May 10th, 1940. Germany invades France and the Low Countries with a plan so audacious that most of their own generals thought it was insane. Instead of the expected attack through Belgium, they sent their main panzer force through the Ardennes forest, terrain everyone said was impassable for tanks. It wasn't. By May 20th, just 10 days later, German tanks reached the English Channel near a small town called Abbeville. Think about that. In less than 2 weeks, they drove from the German border all the way to the ocean, cutting France in half. The British Expeditionary Force, the Belgian Army, and chunks of the French First Army found themselves trapped in northern France, with the Germans between them and Paris. The trap was closing, and it was closing fast. But here's where it gets interesting. On May 21st, the British launched a counterattack near Arras. It was small, just 2 British tank battalions supported by some French units. Militarily, it accomplished almost nothing. Psychologically, it scared the hell out of the Germans. German commanders, who'd been charging westward at breakneck speed with relatively thin forces, suddenly got paranoid. What if the Allies hit their flanks? What if this Arras attack was just the beginning of a massive counteroffensive? Their panzer corridor was stretched to the breaking point, vulnerable to being cut off. This matters. Remember this fear. It's going to influence everything that comes next. By May 23rd, German armor was racing up the coast, systematically taking the Channel ports. Boulogne fell. Calais was under siege, and ahead lay Dunkirk, the last major port still in Allied hands. The Panzers crossed the canal lines protecting Dunkirk's approaches. They were within 9 miles of the town. The British hadn't even fully formed a defensive perimeter yet. This was the moment. The knockout punch was loaded and ready to throw. May 23rd, late afternoon. General Gerd von Rundstedt, commander of Army Group A, the main panzer force, makes a decision. He orders his tanks to halt. His reasoning actually makes sense when you look at it from his perspective. His panzer divisions had been reporting tank losses of 30 to 50%. Not all from combat. Many had just broken down from being driven so hard for so long. They were exhausted. Their supply lines were dangerously extended, and that Arras attack, small as it was, had spooked everyone about Allied counterattacks. Plus, the terrain around Dunkirk looked nasty. Low-lying marshland, crisscrossed with canals, and drainage ditches. One Panzer commander, Ewald von Kleist, had specifically requested a pause to regroup. Rundstedt agreed. Let the infantry catch up, consolidate, then finish the job properly. So far, this is just standard operational caution, maybe overly cautious, but not crazy. But then Hitler shows up. May 24th, Hitler visits Rundstedt's headquarters at Charleville. The two men talk, and Hitler doesn't just approve Rundstedt's halt order, he strengthens it. He makes it official, makes it absolute. The Panzers will stop along a line from Lens to Gravelines, with Dunkirk just beyond. They are, in the exact wording, to be stopped dead in their tracks. And here's where it gets weird. Hitler shifts responsibility for destroying the trapped Allied armies to someone else. Hermann Göring and the Luftwaffe. Göring, head of the German Air Force and one of Hitler's closest allies, has been begging for a chance to prove his Luftwaffe can win battles on its own. He personally assures Hitler that his planes will annihilate the British before they can escape. The Luftwaffe will finish what the army started. This is where the egos get involved. The German army had just pulled off one of history's most stunning victories. They'd done what everyone said was impossible. But Göring and the Luftwaffe wanted their share of glory. And Hitler, always playing his subordinates against each other, gave it to them. There's also the fact that Hitler served in Flanders during World War I. He remembered the waterlogged, muddy hell of that landscape. He was convinced, maybe overly convinced, that tanks would bog down in the marshes and canals around Dunkirk. So the halt order goes into effect on May 24th and lasts until the afternoon of May 26th. Roughly 48 to 72 hours when you factor in the time it took the units to actually get moving again. Meanwhile, what's happening on the other side? Chaos, but organized chaos. British Commander Lord Gort realizes his army is about to be annihilated. He makes the hardest decision of his life. Abandon plans to attack southward and retreat to Dunkirk. Start building a defensive perimeter. Hold the Germans off long enough to maybe evacuate some troops. On May 25th, the British War Office formally approves Operation Dynamo, the evacuation plan. Here's what nobody expected. The British have 3 days to prepare that defensive perimeter, thanks to the German halt. 3 days to organize ships, establish defensive positions, and start planning the largest military evacuation in history. French and British units dig in. They flood fields by opening sluice gates. They fortify the canal lines, and the Royal Navy starts gathering every ship, boat, and floating vessel it can find. May 26th, late afternoon. Hitler finally allows the Panzers to resume their advance. But it's too late. The perimeter has hardened. The evacuation has started. And the Luftwaffe? Well, Göring's big promise runs into 3 problems: exhausted air crews, bad weather, and the Royal Air Force. The Luftwaffe does cause damage, significant damage, but they can't stop the evacuation. German bombers struggle with the smoke from burning oil tanks obscuring targets. RAF fighters contest the airspace, and crucially, the weather keeps turning bad at the worst possible times for German pilots. The little ships became legend. Hundreds of civilian vessels, fishing boats, pleasure yachts, lifeboats crossed the channel alongside Royal Navy destroyers to ferry soldiers off the beaches. From May 27th to June 4th, Operation Dynamo evacuated 338,000 soldiers, roughly 215,000 British and 123,000 French and Belgian troops. They leave behind virtually all their heavy equipment, tanks, trucks, artillery. but they get the men out. So let's address the elephant in the room. The myth you've probably heard. Did Hitler deliberately let the British escape because he wanted peace with Britain? No. And historians are pretty sick of this one. Here's where this idea comes from. Hitler made some remarks suggesting he'd spared Britain. Some German generals, trying to distance themselves from their failures, also pushed this narrative. It made for a convenient excuse. We didn't screw up. Hitler had a master plan we didn't understand. But in Hitler's war directive from May 1940, issued the same day as the halt order, it talks explicitly about annihilating the trapped Allied forces, not sparing them, annihilating them. The halt order was a military decision, arguably a bad one, but a military decision nonetheless. It came from a combination of operational caution, tired tanks, bad terrain assessment, inter-service rivalry between the army and Luftwaffe, and Hitler's micromanaging command style. It was not some grand gesture toward peace. Modern military historians describe the Hitler spared Britain story as myth-making that deserves, in one academic's words, a strong intellectual kicking. But here's the uncomfortable question. How much did the halt order actually matter? Some popular narratives make it sound like if the Panzers hadn't stopped, the British Expeditionary Force would definitely have been wiped out. Recent scholarship is more nuanced. Even without the halt, German tanks still had to fight through fortified canal lines, urban terrain, and determined rearguards. It wasn't just an open road to the beach. The evacuation might have succeeded anyway, just with far fewer soldiers saved and much higher losses. Allied decisions mattered too. Lord Gort's choice to abandon his orders and retreat to Dunkirk was crucial. French rearguard actions, particularly at Lille, where French units held up German forces for days, bought critical time. The halt order helped the evacuation succeed, no question. But it was one factor among many, not a magic bullet that single-handedly saved the British Army. That said, from Germany's perspective, this was still a catastrophic mistake. Those 338,000 evacuated soldiers formed the core of Britain's army for the rest of the war. Without them, Britain's ability to continue fighting becomes questionable. The political pressure to negotiate peace with Hitler might have become overwhelming. Instead, Churchill had an army, battered, without equipment, but alive, ready to rebuild and eventually return to Europe on D-Day. What makes the halt order a blunder isn't that it single-handedly lost Germany the war. It was an unforced error at a critical moment. They had the opportunity to obliterate the British Army, but they grew cautious. Rundstedt wanted to protect his tanks for the next phase of the campaign. Hitler trusted Göring's boasts. Both men were thinking about the bigger picture, the rest of France, the eventual invasion of Britain, and long-term strategy. But in doing so, they took their foot off the throat of a wounded enemy, and that enemy used those precious 3 days to save itself. Here's the final irony. The halt order might have made perfect sense in the moment. Cautious, rational commanders protecting exhausted forces before the final push. The kind of decision that's usually smart, but usually smart doesn't matter when you're 9 miles from winning. Germany would go on to conquer France in 6 weeks. They'd parade through Paris. They'd force France to surrender in the same railway car where Germany had surrendered in 1918. By any measure, Fall Gelb, the invasion of France, was a spectacular victory, but it could have been total. Instead, 338,000 Allied soldiers lived to fight another day. And 4 years later, many of them returned to France on D-Day. Turns out those 9 miles mattered more than anyone realized. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more myths debunked and dive into history's biggest military failures, hit that subscribe button.